This is a story I heard from my cousin May. On her way to Milwaukee, May, her boyfriend, and two other guy friends, one was driving and the other one was in the backseat with May. The four of them got bored and they began telling ghost stories. The guy who sat in the back with May began telling the story about his uncle's adopted child from Laos, Sia. Sia was Hmong and an orphan before she was adopted and brought to the US. During her stay at the family's house, she would always play in the basement and always clung to this pillar. Even though the family had other children, Sia would never play with them when in the basement. By herself, she would cling onto the pillar, singing, hugging, and kissing it. After the family had Sia baptized, they held a little feast where friends and family were to come over. Sia's adoptive father came down to the basement where Sia and some other children were playing and told them to head upstairs. As all the children hurried upstairs, Sia remained behind, clinging onto the pillar. "Sia, we have to go upstairs," her adoptive father said to her. But she shook her head and said that she wanted to stay in the basement and play some more. He simply told her that they had to go upstairs and once the feast is over, she can come back down to play. Eventually, she agreed and headed upstairs. The feast had taken longer than anyone had expected, and soon Sia wanted to return back downstairs. However, her adopted father said that she couldn't go back downstairs until the feast was over. Irritated, she went to her adoptive mother and asked if she could go back downstairs and play. Her adopted mother said that the feast wasn't over, so she'll have to wait. Not to mention, there was no one downstairs. Sia shook her head. She then told her adopted mother that her mother was downstairs. Her adopted mother asked her what she meant. "My mom is downstairs," Sia replied. "She came here with me when I came to the States. She's calling me to come back downstairs and play with her." Sia's adoptive mother became scared. She then told Sia to go play with the other children and to not go downstairs by herself. Before running off, Sia looked at her adoptive mother and said, "Mom says she doesn't like you." At this point, May was already scared. She had thought her friend's story was over, but then he added that his sister went to their uncle's house shortly after and met Sia. He said that his sister's encounter with Sia was pleasant until the very end. "May, since you're the only girl here," May's friend said, "let me demonstrate to show you." Unsure of what her friend was going to do, May agreed. He then reached over and parted May's hair. He then crossed them over the front of her neck and said, "Sia did this and said to my sister, 'This is how my mom died.'" This took place in 2000 to 2001. My parents were out at some benefit as usual and had brought my older sister and brother with them. This left only my younger sister, my grandma and grandpa, my barely 1-year-old brother, and me at home. Eventually, two of my cousins, PK and PH, came over. Besides PH, we all liked watching horror movies, even at our young age of 5 to 6 years old. In particular, we always enjoyed watching this Hmong movie that we called Sha and Go Hua. It wasn't anything gruesome and extremely horrifying. We had watched the movie countless times already, so it wasn't too scary. As we began to watch the movie, I went into the kitchen, which was attached to the living room, and filled some bottles of milk for my baby brother, who would be sleeping with my grandma and grandpa that night. After making the bottles, I placed it into the pink and white cooler that we had, placed an ice pack in there, and then headed to the stairs that would lead upstairs. To get to the stairs, you have to go through the pair of doors which led to the hallway just behind the living room. As you went through the hallway, there was a bathroom in front of you, my parents' bedroom to the left, and the study room with the stairs to the right. I headed upstairs and dropped off the cooler with the bottle before heading back downstairs to join my cousins and younger sister. As I reached the bottom of the stairs and turned to face my parents' bedroom door, I see a glimpse of something white dashing into the living room. It seemed to have ran out from the bathroom. I quickly followed it and went into the living room where my cousins and sister were all sitting in the dark and watching the Hmong movie. I asked them, "Did one of you guys just come out of the bathroom?" They shook their head, and PH was the only one wearing white, a sweatshirt. But I knew it couldn't have been her because she was buried in between her sister and my sister. Being only 6, I thought nothing of the matter, and we all began watching the movie. But it wasn't long before PH started feeling really sick. It was strange timing after seeing the white figure and then PH getting sick all of a sudden. Even as a 6-year-old with a grandma who was a shaman in a highly traditional and religious family, I knew that there was something wrong. But as soon as I told my cousins and my sister that I was going to get my grandma and have her come down, PH suddenly started to feel better. After that, we stopped watching the movie and went on to watching something more upbeat. To this day, I don't know what I actually saw. I can still remember the white object dash out from the bathroom, PH getting sick all of a sudden, and then she magically became fine the moment I mentioned telling my grandma to come downstairs. I could be analyzing it too much, thinking that whatever I saw and PH becoming sick all of a sudden is related. She could have been sick and didn't feel sick until that moment. Then again, people say that when a person gets their energy drained by a spirit, the person becomes and feels ill suddenly. The exorcism of Emily Rose had just come out, and my older brother and I had gone out and rented it. Throughout the 3 days in which we had the movie, I only watched it once because it was all I could stand. For the next week, the movie couldn't help but continue to replay in my mind, so I ended up sleeping in the living room. Making a decision to sleep in my room again was probably the worst mistake I could make. For the next 3 days after returning to my room, I continued to wake up around 3 in the morning. I thought this to be a coincidence, but didn't think much of it. I simply thought that it was because I was thinking about the movie a little too much. Second night, I woke up around 3 a.m. again. I, however, quickly fell asleep. On the third night, I woke up again just as it turned 3. I had to use the bathroom and was about to get out of bed when I noticed something strange. Looking at the door, I could see red light beaming through the crack beneath the door. It didn't make sense that there was any light since it was 3 in the morning. There was no moon out that night and we didn't have any red light bulbs anywhere in the house. This scared the wits out of me because I remembered how, in the movie, the hallway was all red due to the exit signs outside of Emily's dorm room. She had gone out into the hallway, and when she returned, that was when she was attacked. I quickly threw out the idea of going to the bathroom and curled back up into bed. I told myself just to go back to sleep, and that's what I did. After that night, I stopped waking up at 3 a.m. in the morning, and I have yet to watch Exorcism of Emily Rose again. A little over 6 or so years ago, I was heading up to my room after watching TV. My room was the first room when you reached the top of the stairs. Right across from my room, on the end of the hallway, was the computer room, where we had our computer and a TV. As I lied down in bed, I could hear the sound of loud typing. I initially ignored it, thinking that it was probably my older sister writing a story for Quizilla again. But the typing continued, and I couldn't fall asleep. I immediately sat up in bed and leaned over, looking down to the computer room through the doorway to tell my sister to quiet down. My eyes widened when I saw that the computer was on and the chair and keyboard was pulled out. But there was no one in the chair. At first, I had thought that whoever was on the computer has just gotten up. But then the typing began again, and there was still no one in the chair. I immediately turned, fell back onto my bed, and faced my back to the door. I then threw my blankets over myself and shut my eyes tightly. As I lied in bed, the typing had stopped and I could feel something approaching my room. I remember gripping onto my blankets as tight as I could when I felt something standing in the doorway. Then, whatever it was came over to my bed, and the hairs on the back of my neck were standing. I couldn't stand it anymore, the fear and the feeling of someone hovering over me. I quickly threw the blankets off of myself and ran out the door and downstairs into the living room. I told my dad, and he went upstairs and checked things out. He didn't find anything, but that didn't stop me from sleeping in the living room for the next week. When I was young, and even to this day sometimes, I would ask my grandmother to tell me stories, scary stories. One of the first stories she ever told me was of something that happened to her. It was back in Laos, and she was about 14 years old. She and her family were all out farming when her uncle told her to travel down to the pond and get some water. He told her to hurry because night was falling, and they had to get home before it turned dark. My grandmother, not wanting to go, didn't listen to her uncle and took her sweet time traveling to the pond. In order to get there, she had to follow a dirt trail into the woods, and if you know the layout of Laos, you would know that woods and farmland is what makes up the majority of this country. While walking through the woods with her water carrier, which was a large piece of bamboo that is patched at the bottom so the water could be placed in it, she began to sing and talk to herself. Many Hmong people believe that there are always spirits around, and that if you're by yourself and scared, you should talk to yourself. If any spirit is lurking about and hears you talking to yourself, they would think that there are many people with you and will leave you alone. But as my grandmother walked through the woods, she could hear the laughter of girls, which sounded like her friends. She stopped and listened, but there was no one in front or coming from behind her. However, she could still hear their laughter. "My ANC," my grandmother called out. "Stop fooling around and come out." No one answered, so my grandmother began making her way to the pond again. Once there, she descended the small hill and arrived at the pond. As she filled up the bamboo with water, she could hear the sounds of her friends laughing again. Once again, she called out to them, and again, no one answered. Just then, she felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise as she dropped the bamboo and ran back to where her family was. Once there, she asked her mother if her friends had come after she had left to fetch water, and her mother replied no. Soon after that, my grandmother fell very ill, so everyone packed up their things and headed back home. A few days later, my grandmother's mother called a shaman to their house, and he did a little ritual that Hmong people called woneng. The basics behind this ritual is that the shaman places a veil, it could be a red, black, or white, over the shaman's face and begins to chant. This allows them to enter into the spirit world and communicate with the other side. Anyways, after the man finished, he told my great-grandmother that while going to get water, she was being too loud. There were some spirits called panzong who were out and heard my grandmother singing loudly and talking to herself. They said that they were just out to see what she was yelling about. They didn't mean to frighten her. So afterwards, they did another ritual for my grandma where the shaman man spiritually went and picked up my grandmother's spirit and brought it back from where it fell when she was frightened. Afterwards, my grandmother quickly recovered. So, this story isn't quote-unquote scary, but it still freaked me out since it happened to me. This happened about 6 to 7 years back, I believe. My family and I had recently moved into our new house, and my grandmother was visiting. I was in my room and I came down to greet her shortly after she arrived. However, when I came downstairs, I couldn't find my grandmother and my two sisters. I then went into the kitchen and asked my mom where my grandmother and sisters were. She said that they probably went outside for a stroll. My siblings and I tend to go out at night and take walks together now and then. I then headed outside through the garage and into the driveway. Outside, it was pitch dark since we lived in the countryside, so there weren't any street lights, let alone houses. Strangely enough, though, our garage lights, which were motion activated, didn't come on as soon as I stepped outside. Because of this, I didn't want to go out and meet my grandmother and sisters, even though I could hear them talking in the distance. Instead, I waited for them to get back. I stood in the driveway for a few minutes and waited for my siblings and grandmother to come back. I could hear the three of them talking in Hmong, but strangely, I couldn't understand or make out any of the words they were saying. Also, I could hear the sound of them walking on the gravel. We don't have any sidewalks since we're in the country, so there's the road and gravel on both sides of it. But the three of them never seemed to get any closer. I eventually got fed up and headed inside. As I walked down the hallway, I passed the kitchen and then into the living room. To my left was the gathering room, and to my right was the pair of French doors that led to the TV room. And just as I looked into the TV room, I saw all of my siblings in there, along with my grandmother. I immediately went into the room and asked them if they were outside at all. They told me they were all in the basement and had just come up. The hairs on my body immediately stood, and I demanded my siblings to stop lying to me because I heard them outside talking and walking. After all, we were the only Hmong, yet alone Asian people who lived in the area, so who else could it have been? My grandmother then confirmed my siblings' story, and I was completely dumbfounded and freaked out. Since then, no one has ever gone out and taken strolls at night anymore. So one night in the summer of 2011, the wife and I had an argument. At the time, we lived with her parents till we could get a place of our own, and we did. Anyways, she took off in the middle of the night and into the street. She walked a few blocks down, then later came back home to relieve the stress, I guess. After a few nights passed by, she started to feel a supernatural force around her. When she went to sleep, and as soon as she closed her eyes, she would feel the spirit come down the stairs. Then she would shake me and say, "She's coming." This went on for weeks. Every night, as soon as we're about to close our eyes and sleep, she'll say, "It's here," or "It's coming." Then she'll feel the ghost peeking through the small cracks we have in our room. Days and nights went by. It got so bad to where as soon as she closes her eyes, the spirit would attack her, spiritually. There's nights that I have to stay up and look after her, because she'll wake up and cry in pain that it hurts a lot because of the attacks that is happening in the spiritual world. There will be times where she's been sat on and couldn't move till I lightly elbowed her. She was scared, and knowing that she wouldn't be able to move, she rested her fingernails onto my arm. She said if I feel her lightly scratching me, then bump her because she's being sat on. Every night, I have to wake her up because she couldn't move. Once I bumped her, she'll let out a big breath in fear. Then there'll be times where it's like 2 to 3 a.m. in the morning, and she would daze off with her eyes open and won't even hear me when I'm talking to her. She looks as if she's crazy, like she's seeing something and just kept on staring. Then she'll slowly turn and look at me, then turns away and stares at what she was originally staring at. I can't do anything but to watch over her and make sure that she's okay. I'm not letting it get to me or try to scare me because my side of the family just don't see that stuff. So I just man up and hide my weaknesses, even though I don't feel the ghost like my wife does. Finally, my wife's mom took my wife to see a shaman on why this ghost was bothering her. The shaman said that the old lady won't even show her face. She kept looking away and covering her face because she's shy. The shaman asked, what does she want and why was she bothering my wife? The old lady said that her reason was because she saw my wife walking and crying and past the corner where the old lady stands every night. And the old lady saw that my wife has a kind heart, which is the main reason why she felt her home. So the shaman did her thing and told the old lady to go away, and she eventually did. So every time we drive past that corner, which is only a block away from our house, my wife has to try to hide herself in the car so the old lady ghost, whatever, wouldn't see her. The message of this story is to never walk crying alone in the dark streets. If there are wandering spirits nearby, they will follow you home, and it won't be pleasant. This story happened back in 1998 in Fresno, California. I was there to witness a demonic possession. To protect the people's identity, names have been changed. On a hot summer day, Tommy and Jaden with their friends decided to go barbecue at Lost Lake. Everyone showed up for the barbecue and enjoyed their times fishing, swimming, and a few quality times with their lovers. Tommy was the barbecue chief, while Jaden was swimming close by the little beach. Tommy told Jaden to watch the meat while he made a trip back to town for more drinks. Jaden came out of the water and went to grab his towel. He saw a little girl in front of the barbecue grill and thought that it was probably one of their friends who brought their little sister. Jaden went to the bathroom, and when he came out, the little girl disappeared. As he went to check on the meat, there was a bite mark on all of the chicken. Jaden was mad because he assumed that it was his friend taking bites and throwing it back on the grill. Later, everyone ate and all went home. Tommy and Jaden were driving back, and he mentioned about the little girl and wondered who brought her there. Tommy told him that he didn't see anyone bring any little girls or siblings. There were only adults in this group. When they both got home, Tommy dropped off Jaden at his house and went home. That night, Jaden had a dream of seeing a creature at Lost Lake. He mentioned about seeing that little girl transforming into a ghost with long white hair. The next morning, Jaden woke up and went to the kitchen. His grandma noticed that there was a bite mark on his back shoulder. The grandma questioned him about it. He said he didn't know how he got it, and so the grandma put some medicine over the bite mark. But as she went to apply the medicine onto Jaden, she felt a sharp pain on her back. The grandma stopped and told Jaden to help her back to the sofa and call his parents. Later on, they discussed about the bite mark. Jaden told everyone what he saw yesterday at Lost Lake, and his dad noticed that the creature had followed his son home. The dad prayed to God for his son, but the creature was inside the grandma. That night, the grandma started to say all sorts of weird things and chanted in a different language. She screamed, cried, jumped, and bit and scratched people. The family decided to tie Grandma up and call a priest. The priest came over and performed some of his duties. However, Grandma was able to kick the priest down so hard that he calmed. I was there to witness the possession of this demon, and I noticed that her skin color was changing, as well as her eyes. My parents told me to go home, but I refused and was drawn into watching her possessed. Grandma asked everyone to lift up her shirt because her stomach wasn't feeling normal anymore. So they lifted up her shirt and saw a handprint on her stomach. They decided to call their neighbor that was a shaman. She came over, did a ritual, and told the family to take her outside as she will continue to perform more of the ritual outside of their house. The shaman lady held a gong with a stack of burnt incense sticks and a pan of hot oil on the other hand. She used the sticks to flicker the hot oil to cause flames and sparks around the grandma. Grandma's clothes were caught on fire a few times, but this was quickly put out with water. The ritual went on for 1 hour, and then Grandma woke up from her demonic possession. The shaman lady told Grandma to go under this rope of lemongrass with wooden knives hanging before entering their home. She was freed from this possession and lived very well, but In 2004, she passed away due to old age. Something that we can learn is that not every religion is made for everyone. Don't judge others by their religion because someday they might be your savior, not your light. Back in Thailand, Hmong people performed related spirit rituals and funerals mostly inside of their homes. There was this ritual called Ju Cha, where they carried the deceased out into the open, empty field before his or her burial. After their funeral, his or her spirit wandered around after the dark night began. There had been encounters between humans and spirits at occasions on these nights. A young man named Thu frequently went out at night and came home after midnight. One day, his mother lectured him and told him to come home before the darkness appeared. She said this is for his own good and, more importantly, for him to avoid meeting wandering spirits. As a cocky man, Thu replied back, "If I meet a lady ghost, I will take her back to my bed and sleep with her." He left the house after saying that. Thu eventually wandered around the village, courted girls, and kicked it with his friends until 3 a.m. in the morning. Since it was very late, he decided to walk home alone through the dark streets. At a far distance, he turned around and happened to see a person walking behind him. He thought that he could wait for the person and walk with them so he could feel safer. As soon as the person reached him, he noticed that this person carried a bamboo hearse on her back and held a flute. She had long, messy hair and a very long red tongue sticking out of her mouth and was wearing Hmong clothes. She then asked, "Son, do you want to play my flute?" Terrified, he realized that this woman was not a living person. Deeply afraid, he ran away from her. Every time he turned around, she was right behind his back, even though he ran as fast as he could. Upon arriving at his house, he knocked on a door and screamed his mom's name to let him in. Luckily, his mother opened the door and he safely came inside to hide. That night, the spirit climbed up the tree by Thu's house and shook the tree till the sun came up. That morning, they noticed that the tree's leaves had fallen from their places completely to the ground. Thu's mother had asked a shaman to look into this matter, and they changed his name to protect him. He was lucky enough to stay alive. Otherwise, he would have been very sick to the point of death. One day, a father and son went fishing on a boat not too far away from their home. The father was at the very front of the boat, while the son was at the very back of the boat. While fishing, the father got really tired and decided to sleep for a while. When he woke up, he realized that his son wasn't there anymore. He dove into the water and looked for his son, but his son was nowhere to be found. He swam up to the shore and ran home, hoping that his son was there. Unfortunately, he wasn't. The father got really worried and called the cops. They investigated the lake and nearby surroundings, but could not find any trace of the missing son. Days and nights passed as everyone continued to search for the missing boy. Finally, on one night, a cop had a dream about the missing boy. In the dream, the boy walked up to the cop and said, "How can you guys not find my body? I'm only under the boat." After that, the cop immediately woke up. Curious about the dream, the cop went to the boat the following morning and took a deep breath. He pulled the boat out of the water, and there was the missing boy stuck under the propeller that kept the boat moving. One night, while I got ready for bed, I noticed that my sister was already under the blanket, so I turned off the lights to not bother her and changed in the dark. As I was settling in, I tried to make conversation with my little sister, but she only answered here and there. I figured that she was tired, so I stopped talking and closed my eyes. Just seconds later, the doorbell started to ring. I nudged my sister's shoulder, saying, "Go get the door." But she didn't get up. The doorbell just kept ringing, so I got up to open the door. I swung the door open, and my jaw dropped in disbelief. There stood my little sister, angry, saying that it was cold. Why didn't I open the door quicker? I ran back to the room and turned the lights on. It was empty. Not a single person in the room. The night of July 4th, my family and I celebrated the evening with the displays of fireworks. It was coming near to an end at around 9:30 p.m., so we all decided to come home from dinner. As we were all chatting away and so forth, our doorbell rang. The strange part was we all had our black metal screen door closed only, while our front door was wide open, so whoever rang the doorbell would have been spotted quickly. I went to check, but there was no one there at all. About 10 to 15 minutes after ringing the doorbell, my parents received a call from our uncle. He told us that his wife had just passed away, and he wanted my parents to come over. I put the pieces together and figured that it must have been our aunt who came to visit us, which explained the strange doorbell ringing. From what I heard and was told, my aunt and uncle went camping to celebrate July 4th with other relatives. On the 4th of July at camp, my aunt kept seeing this tiger-like creature roaming around the trees near their camping place. Thinking it might have been some other camper's pets, she just ignored it. However, she started feeling lightheaded and weak when they were all getting ready to come home. On the road home, the tiger-like creature suddenly sprang in front of their cars at least a good 50 feet away or so from them. One of my relatives decided to get his rifle and shoot at it, but it ran off after he missed twice. My aunt came home to rest, but she kept growling in a low tone every now and then in her sleep. What worried my uncle was when she would start growling and the back of her eyes rolled back. She told my uncle to give her some raw and uncooked meat because she was hungry. During the funeral, one of my uncle's son went home to grab pillows and bring back some boiled chickens from home. As he gathered the stuff, he noticed that some of the drumsticks from the chickens were missing, like someone ripped it off. He then asked his family to see if anyone came home that night and did anything to the chickens, but they all said no. At the funeral, uncooked meat and pieces of chickens suddenly went missing. The son then dreamt later that night that at the funeral, it was his mom who ate the drumstick because she was hungry, and that his dad is mean because he didn't feed her uncooked meat when she asked for it. Exactly 13 days after the funeral, my uncle received a call from my aunt. All my uncle heard was his name being called and growling on the other end. Then, my aunt told my uncle that she became a tiger and for him not to worry about her. So during my college days, I had a friend who we will refer to as K, whose favorite joke was that he had a dead girlfriend. Well, at first, no one thought too much of it. We just ignored it because it was a dumb thing to say regardless of justification. But about a year after my friends and I moved out of the dorms, Kay joined us as roommates. About 1.5 years of being roommates with Kay, I had this weird dream. In the dream, my roommates and I were all busy playing Dota. From where I was playing in the dream, I was close to the windows, I could hear something moving outside, and I figured that it was someone coming to visit. So I walked to the door and checked to see who it was via the peephole. This part is strange because the real apartment door didn't even have a peephole. I saw what seemed to be a mix between a tiger and a woman. Before I knew it, the tiger lady was trying to force her way in, and by instinct I was pushing against the door to keep her out. I remember calling out for my roommates to come down to help me so we could lock the deadbolt. We all pushed against the door with all our might, and we all tried to twist the deadbolt shut. It was hard because the lady on the other side was pushing even harder than us. Eventually, we were able to hold her off and twist the deadbolt. But then there was a loud bang in the dream and I woke up. So I'm not sure if we were ever actually able to lock it. About a week after this dream, everything got a bit stranger. My roommates and I just found it tremendously hard to stay in Kay's room. The room was cold and dark. He started to turn off the lights while surfing the net, and it just felt like someone was telling you to get up because you were invading its space. During that same week, I had more dreams about the tiger woman, but there was a particular dream that scared me. In the dream, I had woken up and was walking to our living room area. In the dream, I thought it was weird because it was just me. I remember looking towards Kay's room, and this time, she was inside Kay's room. Before I knew it, there was a loud screech like she was giving me a head start, and before I knew it, she was chasing me. My gut reaction was to run towards the door. The door is almost directly in line with Kay's door, and when I got there, I realized I had to twist the deadbolt. So I started trying to twist the deadbolt, but I was fumbling it. No matter what I did, it just wouldn't twist all the way, and before I knew it, there was a hand on my shoulder. All I felt was a big tug, and I fell to the ground. Even though I felt it was pointless, I struggled and tried to crawl back towards the door, clinging to carpet with both my fingers and mouth. I remember her saying in Hmong, "Chota, you're a tough one, aren't you?" Alas, her grip was stronger than mine, and she was able to pull me towards Kay's room. I remember as I was being dragged into his room on my back, I saw her, and she was wearing red and grinning at me. When I saw her grin, I decided I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction, so I flipped her the bird. As I passed through the opening of his door, I woke up. About a week after that dream, the instances with the red lady occurred. I got home from class early, so I decided I was going to take a nap. When I woke up from the nap, it was already 8 p.m. and it was dark outside. So I walked out to the living room area and talked to my roommate there. After a couple minutes of chatting, I asked if Kay was back or not. He said he didn't know because he just got back. So I decided to check up on Kay. I cracked his door open a bit and let the living room light come in. I saw blankets covering someone and loud breathing, so I told my roommate, "Yeah, he's in there sleeping." About 20 minutes of surfing the net, I hear the doorbell ring. I opened the door and my heart started to sink and my blood turned cold. I had opened the door and found myself wondering what the heck and looking directly at Kay. In the previous house that my family and I used to live in, I believed it was haunted, or it could have been one of those reoccurring spirits who was after my mom and was later after my siblings and I. One night, I decided to give my son a bath, and after his bath, I put him into his red Elmo pajamas. I thought I better let him be active for the moment until he decides to fall asleep, so I left into the living room to watch some more night shows. As I was watching TV for a while, I was thinking of why I haven't seen my son or heard him at all. From the part of the living room where I was at and facing, if you turn your head to the right, you can see through the dining room into the hallways. There were 3 bedrooms to the right and 2 bedrooms to the left. My room was down to the furthest right, and the first 2 rooms were both of my elder brothers. The farthest room down to the left was the master bedroom, which was my parents' haunted bedroom, and the first bedroom onto the left belongs to my youngest brother. At the time, my son was only at the age of 2, so as I was thinking, I decided to yell out my son's name, and after calling it out 2 or 3 times, I saw my son. He was walking slowly across my parents' bedroom to my bedroom and slammed the door shut. I was thinking to myself, since when did my son learn to close the door knowing that he wouldn't be able to open it himself? I called out his name, and as I was about to get up from the couch, my son actually came out from my younger brother's room, which was the first bedroom on to the left. I was shocked and freaked out of my mind. I fell back onto the couch and instantly knew that the baby I saw walking from my parents' bedroom into my room was not my son, but instead a ghost. A few years ago, there were two guys named Lu and Su. They both went to the same church as we did. One day, a group of the youth members decided to go hang out at the beach together. Lu and Su also went with the group, so the young kids decided to go swimming. Then, all of a sudden, a big wave came over and took a few guys out. Lu and Su were two of the unlucky ones who couldn't be saved. Everyone felt so helpless while watching all the search teams look for them. As everyone waited on the beach for the two guys, the parents of Su, even though we're Christians, went to go seek help from a shaman. The shaman said that it's dragon season, and that dragons of the sea has taken their lives because in their past life, Lu and Su were lovers that committed to each other, and in this life, Su had a girlfriend that he was truly in love with. The spirit didn't want him and his girlfriend to be together, so that was why the two guys drowned and passed away. A few weeks later, their bodies washed ashore, and the families held a ceremony and buried them. So, some quick information. Dragons in the Hmong culture aren't always your typical reptilian lizard creature. In fact, they also refer to any spirits that reside in bodies of water. This story was a little confusing, but still entertaining nonetheless. Back in Thailand, there lived an old man and his daughter. They didn't have much money, so the old man asked around for work. One day, he told his daughter that he had finally found some work for them and that the boss would pay them a lot. But it's at a farm isolated and far away from their village, so they would have to go stay at that farm until the season was over. They both agreed and traveled to the farm. This farm had two different sections, so the old man would work in one large section while his daughter worked on the other, and there was a small hut available for the both of them. Every morning, they both would wake up and go their separate ways to farm, and when dark fell, they would return to the hut. This went on for several weeks, and the daughter soon became lonely from the isolation. One day, while farming, she said to herself, "Why am I so lonely? There's no friend around to talk to for fun at all." That night, when she was about to fall asleep, someone started knocking on her side of the wall. "Miss, have you already fell asleep?" The charming man behind the wall asked. She then replied, "No, I haven't. And who are you with the charming voice?" "Well, I saw you this morning and thought you might be lonely, so I decided to come talk to you." Because she was so lonely, and because she was drawn to his charming voice, she continued to talk to him. Since that encounter, he continued visiting her every night, and their relationship soon turned into love. Weeks passed, and she would hassle about seeing each other face to face, but he refused to visit her, explaining that he was afraid of her father. One day, she finally says to him, "You know, we've been talking for so long now, and I still haven't seen your face. When will I ever get a chance? But I'm afraid if you see my face, you might not like me anymore. Your voice is so sweet. No matter if you are handsome or not, I will still love you." But he kept refusing. "Then, can you at least give me your hand so I could touch them?" He slipped his hand through the thatch wall, and she held tightly. Without him knowing, she tied a string of yarn to his sleeve and said to him, "Okay, I'm done. Well, good night. I'll talk to you tomorrow." The next morning, she got up and the first thing she did was follow the string of yarn that she had tied to his sleeve. She followed it past the farm, over the hill, to the next village, and back under her bed. Horrified, she runs to her father and tells him that she wanted to go back home as soon as possible, but never mentioned her secret boyfriend to him. Her father says to her, "Daughter, the season is almost over. Let's finish it so we can get our money and just go." "But Dad, I hate this place. Can't we just leave?" "No, The boss says he'll pay a lot if we work here, since no one was willing to come here and take care of his farm. Why not, Dad? Well, because this place used to be a gravesite. This is just my own story of my encounter with spirits. I used to live in Cali dating back to 1997. I was just 5 years old and we were living in a small apartment in Stockton. I, for one, did not believe in ghosts back then until my encounter that year. The night before the event happened, my brothers and sisters and cousins were outside playing tag and talking about things. At that time, I was inside making rice because I was a little chubby kid who was always hungry. No one would make rice so late around 11 p.m. My parents would leave the door wide open while they sat in our living room talking to my aunts and uncles. While I was trying to figure out how to make rice, my parents looked over their shoulders at who was making all that noise over at the kitchen. To their surprise, they found a little fat chubby kid trying to remember how the rice was made. My aunts and uncles chuckled and said if I keep it up at that rate with all the noise that I was making, someone else will be making the entire ruckus too. At the time, I didn't get it, but I actually made the rice. It wasn't very successful, but I still made it. After I was done, I had to wait until the rice cooker was done cooking the rice, so I decided to go outside to play with all the regular old kids, playing hide-and-seek tag in the dark as well. Although I was not in the best of shape, I was still able to at least be the person who was overlooked the most since I was also very short. When it was my turn to hide, I ran to hide behind a set of bushes that were near a wooden fence. To get to it, however, you had to go through a small hole that was just enough to fit a smaller person. Earlier, I saw that someone was able to go through the fence with no problem, so I could do that too. My stubbornness to not be it kicked in and I decided at all costs to try to fit through the hole, even if it costed me my life. Ironically, what awaited me could have done the same thing. I pushed and pulled, and finally I magically popped through. I crouched and giggled to myself that I will never be found at this rate. And then a slightly cold breeze blew from my right, which forced me to turn my head to the left. There was a dark figure standing, looking through a hole in the fence. At that moment, I started getting the chills. However, seeing that I was a little kid, I didn't know any better. So, I went to stand right beside the figure and was wondering what it was looking at. All of a sudden, I overheard one of my girl cousins saying that she saw a red eye looking at her through the fence. I found it hilarious that it was me and the figure playing a prank on them to scare them. It was all fun and games until I started looking at how the figure was dressed. Its hair was very long and fuzzy, while it was wearing monk clothes that was meant for a man with a red waistcloth. I started freaking out when it slowly turned towards me. I started backing away slowly and tried to make my way to the hole. It turned to me with its bloodshot red eyes that pierced through my soul and sent chills down my body. I started to run on my short stubby legs towards the hole and tried to squeeze through this time again, but it was stuck. I started yelling for help and it seemed like all hope was lost when I felt the cold hands grab a hold of my legs and slowly try to pull me back out. I was so scared that I started crying and yelling out my older brother's name. Someone noticed my yelling and was running towards me. I thought I was safe, but it turned out to be my younger cousin who was still picking her nose. She was laughing at me because I had snot and tears all over my face. I thought that all hope was lost because I felt that I was slowly being pulled the other way. It was over, I thought. There was nothing I could do to save myself anymore, until the almighty stomach kicked in and I let out a huge stinky fart. That's when all the pulling and coldness stopped completely. My older brother finally came over and pulled me to safety. I grabbed onto him as strong as I could and cried into his arms and wiped everything onto him as punishment for being slow. He took me home and told my parents. They thought that I was just being a kid and maybe someone was pulling a trick on me. My mom gave me a hot plate of food that I ate up and was happy the next minute. I went to sleep at the same time that everyone did. I slept on the same bed as my older brother and fell asleep fast when he let me sleep against the wall, the safest place. The next morning, I woke up to a breeze from the window that my sisters and brothers opened. I was still sleepy, but I suddenly felt a tremor. The temperature was slightly getting colder, and I immediately hid under the blankets. I just knew deep down what was coming. The door was closed, windows opened, and no one in the room to save me this time. I did not want to yell in case it knew where I was, but then again, it wasn't hard to tell. I closed my eyes at first and then opened them. There it was, standing there at the door looking right at me. I could not see anything but a dark figure. I started crying and bickering how I knew that this was it. I could not possibly survive this one. It started walking closer to me, and its figure was growing even more. That's when my older brother opened the door and jumped on me. He started yelling at me to get up and go eat because our mom baked a whole chicken. The figure disappeared entirely at that moment, and I was saved again. I never spoke of it this time. Instead, I ran out first and went to grab my plate of food. I was so happy that I forgot it at that time. However, this time, I remembered it for sure. The funny thing was that I went to church with my brother and them the next day. At the time, we were still shamans, but I needed a change. That's when I finally found my faith in God. Proud to say I could have been the first converted in my family. Ever since then, I attended church, and when the pastor placed his hands on my head and spoke the holy words, I never once saw anything again. It was like angels came down and covered my eyes and hid me from them. To this day, my belief is probably still the same, but my families have all converted. This was my story and how my encounter brought me to my faith. It's not that the old way was not enough, but everyone is different, and this was my story. Since I've been reading many stories about people being sat on by ghosts and sleep paralysis, I will tell you all of my experience. I come from a family that is involved with a lot of spiritual things. Being sat on is a natural thing in my family. I've experienced sleep paralysis countless times, but there was one time where my tears actually came out. One night, when I was falling asleep, I saw a very tall figure at my door. I thought I was dreaming, so I decided that I would try to close my eyes to see if the 6-foot-tall black figure will go away. I closed my eyes, but when I reopened it, guess what? He was standing right by my bedside, staring down at me. All this was happening when my brother was still next to me, talking to his girlfriend on the phone. I tried screaming his name, but I was frozen and I wasn't able to scream or move. I decided the only way to get from him was to try to go to sleep again, so I did. I fell asleep and, for some odd reason, I woke back up. When I rubbed my eyes, I saw a little boy with a straw hat walking through my door dragging a cow with bells tied around the cow's neck. When I saw the boy moving closer to me, the pressure on me was tighter and I couldn't move a single muscle. As soon as the boy stopped right by my bedside and stared at me, there were 2 ghostly arms that came through my window and laid its hands on my chest. The hands were cold and it was pulling my spirit away from my body. I literally saw my spirit come out of my body, and then my tears came out. I was thinking to myself, is it really time to die already? After a few tears came out of my eyes, I decided it was not my time to die yet, so I started to move little by little. Soon, my feet were free. Then, my whole body became free. The little boy disappeared, and I saw the arms from my window go away. From that day, I just didn't care about it anymore. If I see them come, then I just did my best to ignore it. This story was told to me by an old lady at an event. it will be told in the first person, which makes it easier. There was news on the TV about 2 young American girls who went missing, and that's when she told me her story. Back in Laos, when I was still 18, there weren't many missing kids like here in the US, but when there were kids missing, people encountered them as ghosts. One day, a little girl at the age of 8 who lived in my town went missing. Her parents and people of the town went searching for her, but there were no trace of her at all. She was walking back home from school, but never made it back. She wasn't found, so everyone moved on with their life, and her parents decided to move to another little town. 2 months later, I was walking to the garden by myself, since I was too lazy to wake up early to go with my family. I was walking, and in the far distance, I saw a little girl standing by a tree. She was wearing a school uniform, so I didn't think too much about it. I thought that, oh, maybe school is over and kids are coming back. As I got closer, the little girl looked very dirty. Her clothes were ripped and torn, and she had mud all over her. Still, I didn't think much, because little kids play with dirt most of the time anyways. As soon as I walked past her, I heard a sobbing noise, and all the hair on my body stood right up. I looked back, and the sobbing stopped. Something in my guts just told me to ask the little girl if anything was wrong and why she was there and if she needed any help. The little girl replied that she can't find her mom and dad and that she is scared. So I asked her where she lives and why is she here all alone. Surprisingly, she lived in my town, and I told her that I'll take her back and later I'll walk to the garden. So I grabbed her hand and walked with her back to the town. But she was cold. Her little hand was cold and dirty. As soon as we got into town, I asked her about where she lives, and she pointed to the abandoned house of the little girl who went missing. I told her, "You live there? No one lives there." I looked at her and she smiled back and said, "I'm finally home. I've been so tired waiting to come back." Right there and then, my whole body felt heavy, and thoughts of the little girl who went missing filled my mind. I freaked out, put the little girl on the rock and asked her to stay put and ran to a close-by neighbor's house to ask for help. I told them that I found a little girl and that she's sitting on the big rock. As soon as we looked back there was no one but a log on top of the rock. I was speechless. About a month ago, me, my best friend, and her sister started watching these Ouija videos. We were a bit scared, but still wanted to try out to see if these things really work. We made our own board and printed out instructions. We started asking if anyone was there. There was no answer. We stopped after trying about 27 times. We then found out that there was a Buddha in the drawer. So we decided to try it outside at the back of the house. It worked, a little bit. First, we talked to a demon named David. We asked him many questions like how he died and if he was a good spirit. When we tried asking him how old he was, we didn't even have time to finish the question, and then he answered 666. We were so shocked that my best friend went to the goodbye sign without saying anything, and then she ran away. She came back, and then we played again. This time, we came in contact with a spirit of a girl. Her name was Dara. We asked how old she was, but it was unclear. All we know is that she wrote a 4, and then a 5, 6, and 7. We asked her if she was 47, and then my best friend started laughing. But it was not her laugh. It was as if something was possessing her and laughing. Her voice was different. Her sister and I both ran away, and then later we went back to see where my best friend was. We saw her sitting there and crying. She asked why did we leave her alone. We just took the board and the glass cup and walked back together. A few days later, her sister came back with a real Ouija board this time. It was from Germany. It was so big that we actually started laughing the first time. We weren't allowed at the back of the house anymore, so we decided to play on the balcony. When we asked the spirit if anyone was there, it raced to the sign, yes, and then it fell off the board. We asked if we had better connection from up there, then it did it again. We spoke to many spirits and found out that there is a master and that the spirit is inside the board. We also found a way to tickle it. You just have to tap the pointer. One spirit's name was Suzanne, which was the exact same name my best friend has. We asked how old it was and for the last name and how many sisters she has. It was like there was another life. We also asked if there was a Jennifer like me and if I was dead. It said I got skinned alive and hung up in a closet, just like the Smith sisters. Another spirit said that the master wanted to kill Suzanne and train her. It said she had a special power, and we found out that was why they were going to take her. That's when we didn't want to play it anymore. There were also some funny spirits and cute ones too. One boy's name was Daniel. He was 3 years older and died because he fell off the stairs. He said he misses his mom. When we asked him how he died, the planchette moved off the board. We figured that he didn't want to spell it out for us. Then there was another boy who said his name was Google. We asked where he came from, and he said the internet. We asked what language he speaks, and he said Wikipedia. After we talked to him, we found out that heaven is just like the normal world, and that it has streets and cities and countries, but they don't have the same names. What they actually did was put two real street names together, and that would be a heavenly street. The board said that Ouija won't work for anyone anymore without Suzanne for the whole world. Interesting story, but take it with a grain of salt. We drive on freeways so much that sometimes we forget we aren't alone. I'm not talking about the hundreds of cars that accompany us, but the spirits that wander on that exact same freeway we drive on every day. What's been left there, who's been killed there, and those who follow us home. Our doors are locked, but the presence of not being alone in the car creeps up on us. We look at our rear view mirror expecting to see an empty back seat. But what happens when we don't? They are there, good or bad, they are still there. It was a late night, and I was driving back home to Sacramento from Fresno. I had just visited my boyfriend, and saying bye had stalled more than I liked. I was finally on the road at about 1:30 in the morning and was already dreading the long drive by myself. I hated the long straight road on Highway 99. At least there's no traffic, I thought to myself. So I drove alone and went on my way. The gas was still halfway, and I told myself I'd stop for gas when I got to Merced or Turlock, and I did just that. At the gas station in Merced, I overheard the cashier telling the couple in front of me about a rest stop a few miles ahead. I would have stopped there if I were you guys. Just use the bathroom here or wait until you've passed it to use the bathroom. I don't know exactly, but there are way too many stories at that rest area. I wouldn't risk it. The cashier said something along the lines of that, and it made me curious. I had heard about that rest area, but I've never stopped there. A lot of my Hmong friends told me that it was haunted. I never asked how or by what, and I was never too curious to stop there and test it out myself. On my way back, I was feeling drowsier than I had thought. It was cold, but I didn't want to turn on the heat because I'd fall asleep if I got too comfortable. All of a sudden, I felt the need to use the bathroom. My bladder felt like it was about to explode any minute, and there were no gas station stops nearby. I saw the sign for the rest area and told myself I'd wait, or pee in my car if I had to, and that there was no way in hell that I was stopping there. But, as if something took over me, I told myself that it was just all make-believe and that I had nothing to be afraid of. I'll just use the bathroom really fast and leave. So I exited. There were a bunch of trucks there as well, so it made me feel more relaxed. It didn't seem like it was such a bad area after all. I parked and ran into the bathroom. Luckily, there was a mother and her young toddler with her inside the bathroom. I ignored them and ran inside the stall. I took care of business, got out, washed my hands, and left. It was getting cold. I was starting to shiver, but at least I was awake. I was alone on the road. There was only one other car behind me, and it was about 5 cars length away. The lights made me feel safe that I wasn't completely by myself. I checked the rearview mirror every now and then, and just to make sure that the car was still there. But this time, when I looked up to check again, the light was gone. The car wasn't there. There were no exits yet, and there was no way that that car could have got off the road. I immediately looked ahead and focused on the road. I was getting a little scared, but it wasn't anything. Or so I thought. As scared as I was getting, there was this temptation of looking at my rearview mirror or turning around to see if there's anything behind me that I could not fight. So I looked back. When I looked back, I saw a blonde woman holding on to her toddler son. They were dirty, clothes ripped, and the boy was crying. I turned back to the front, panting. I looked at my rearview mirror, and yet, nothing. I continued driving, but I could still hear the soft crying of the little boy behind me. Chills were running up my spine. The sound of his crying rang in my ears, and I looked at my mirror again, and there, I saw the woman's eyes piercing right through me. Her eyes were bloodshot red, and her face was moldy and old. Her lips were chapped and broken. Her eyes didn't look away from me as she was leaning closer to the front seat. I screamed and pressed on the gas, closing my eyes. When I opened them again and looked back, they were gone. I was still alone on the road. The remaining of the drive was fast and quiet, but I never felt quite alone, although very few cars joined me every now and then. I was finally in Sacramento again and exiting the freeway. I stopped at the red light. At the corner of my eyes, I saw a figure walking. I turned to look, and there they were. The same mother and her son walking on the ridge that I was stopped at. The boy turned over and looked at me. His wet eyes glared at me. His face was pale and his eye sockets were deep in red. My eyes were stuck on them as they were heading in the same direction as me. I ran the red light and sped home. The next morning, I told my mom about it, and she called my uncle, who knew how to shaye. He said that they had been with me ever since I left Fresno. The reason I saw them at the rest stop, in my car, and at the red light was because they needed a ride. The little boy needed to use the bathroom, and that was the cause of the unexpected full bladder. He was crying because he was afraid, as they were more afraid of us than we are of them. The mother saw me looking and felt the need to defend herself and her son, which was why she was leaning towards me. When I saw them at the light, it was them leaving, one step closer to their destination. Then, my uncle asked me if I saw the car that disappeared, and I said yes, and asked how he knew. He then told me that we are never alone on the road. Some cars we see are there, but they aren't. There are some spirits that are unable to leave the road because of all the unexpected deaths that always occur. Now, I hate driving alone. I hate driving at night. I hate rear view mirrors. Do you ever get the feeling? The feeling of something or someone watching you from behind? The sense of someone so close to you that you could almost feel them? You can sense their presence, but you just tell yourself it's all in your head. Or is it? This story took place in St. Nazianz, Wisconsin, and the surrounding areas. One day, me, Jenny, Joe, and John were telling ghost stories in a car at Silver Creek. We started talking about all the different people who experienced paranormal activity while on the grounds of an abandoned church in St. Nazianz. The first story was that of my mother. Many Hmong people like to go to St. Nazianz to pick mushrooms behind the church. There's a patch of woods in the back. As they arrived, they split up and told each other that they would meet each other back at a certain spot. That was when they didn't have cell phones at the time. My mom went off and did her own thing, and when it was about the time to meet up again, she grabbed her bucket and started heading back to the meeting area. But no matter which trail she walked on, she always ended back where she started. She knew she was lost. She told me that she kept walking around in circles for a long time, and it seemed that even if she walked a different direction, she kept ending up where she started. She started to cry and call her friends names, but no one answered. So since that didn't work, she started to pick mushrooms out of her bucket and made a trail behind her while walking. She was yelling out loud and said that if there was anyone blocking her, they needed to stop because it's getting late and she needs to get home. And if they keep her from finding the meeting spot, she would come back and set a curse upon them. After saying this for a good 30 minutes or so, she used all of her mushrooms to set a trail. Finally, she reached the meeting spot. Everyone was already there waiting for her, and they had asked her what took her so long to come back, but she didn't dare say anything until they dropped her off home. As she got out of the car, she told them she would not be going back to that place anymore with them because a ghost was blocking her from leaving that land. My mother never did go back to pick mushrooms. There's more stories about that freaky place, but I'll make it short. After storytelling, Joe had the great idea of, "Oh, I've never been there, so let's go." I knew it was a bad idea because it was already 11 p.m. and, like my mom always says, be careful because you might bump into a ghost. We drove 30 minutes to our destination just to drive past it and make a U-turn around to go back into town. The story behind St. Nazianz is the church is called the JFK Preparatory High School, a Catholic school where the nuns used to hit the boys and torture them. It was said that one of the nuns hung herself out there, and it was rumored that you can hear the voices of little boys at night. There's a church by it and a graveyard where the nuns are buried. By January of 2004, it wasn't advised to go to the church or anywhere on the grounds. A gate surrounded the entrance, so no one was allowed on the property. Now, back to the story. As we were driving past the high school, everything is dark, but you could see the streetlights. Joe drove slowly, and then John starts to say, "Did you guys see that? There are lights on in the building." At that time, we all looked out the window to look at the building, but we saw nothing. It was pitch black. We told him to cut it out. Why is he trying to freak us all out for? We were in the middle of absolutely nowhere. As we drove past and busted a U-turn around, going past the building a second time, he started screaming and said, "Drive faster!" Joe pressed onto the gas and we were speeding past the building. We all turned to John and he's crying and covering his face with his hands. I told him to stop it, and why was he playing games? And then he uncovered his face from his hands and he's still bawling his eyes out. At this time, he's looking out the window and then he says, "Where are we going? Why are we going to a cemetery?" At this point, I started crying too because I was scared. Joe is still continuing to speed to get to a road with more light, and Jenny is plugging her ears and closing her eyes. Everyone just got quiet, and Joe sees a gas station ahead with lights on. We stopped, and John tries to open the door, but the door wouldn't open. Joe gets out of the car and tries to open the car from the outside, while John and I were trying to open the door from the inside. The next thing I know is that John screamed and said, "Stop that, you ghost!" We all just stopped trying to open the door and watched John open the door so easily. He sprints into the gas station and in about 3 minutes he runs back out and says, "Hurry, let's drive home." No one was talking at this time, but by the time we got home, we were all asking John what happened, and this is what he said. He said that there was a bunch of lights turned on at the high school, and as we drove past there, that's when a ghost saw us and they came into the car. The spirit was sitting next to him, and there were some spirits flying outside the windows as we were driving. He thought we were going to the cemetery because he saw their gravestones in the middle of the road. As soon as we got to the gas station and tried opening the door, there was a ghost holding the lock button down, so that's why we couldn't open the door. When he was in the gas station in the bathroom washing his face, the ghost was behind him. He told the ghost that he was going to come back and get him, but he needed to do something first. So the ghost left him at the bathroom, and that's when he ran back to the car and we all left. This happened just last year. My family's been living in this house for over 18 years, and over the 18 years, many strange things would happen. The people who currently reside in my house is my older brother, his wife, their 4-year-old daughter, my little sister, and my parents. I am a very light sleeper and would constantly wake up at around 3 a.m. I would wake up every night at exactly 3:33 a.m. for at least a month. Every time I woke up, I would hear weird things outside of my bedroom, like the chain lock outside of my door jingle, as if someone was touching it to get inside. Sometimes I would even hear footsteps. I would always just get up and turn on the lights and it would go away. Well, I wasn't the only one experiencing weird things. One night, my 4-year-old niece kept saying she saw an old lady outside of my door. We didn't know what to do, so we just didn't say anything. And then one day, my niece started carrying this toy around with her. It was a small stuffed dog and it just came out of nowhere. She would be playing and talking to someone. We thought it was like an invisible friend, but my sister-in-law was super creeped out. My niece would say things like, "My friend eat too?" And my sister-in-law told us that during the night, my niece would stand up and just look at them. Like, stand there and stare at them. Well, one day, my sister-in-law decided to bring her shaman friend over, and she brought them upstairs to the bedroom. Her shaman friend told her that when my other brother and his wife came to visit, a spirit of a little girl followed them here to my house. And when they left, the little girl stayed because she liked my niece and wanted to play with her. She liked my niece so much that she gave her a toy, the stuffed animal. This really scared my sister-in-law because she never mentioned the toy to her shaman friend. Her shaman friend also mentioned that there were other ghosts in the house. One was an old man that has been there forever and refused to leave the house. She talked to the old man and he said that he was angry with the remodeling we were doing to the house. But he said that he wasn't the one that was bothering us at night. It was the other spirits. There was one spirit that was a boy and he just enjoyed watching TV. Well, to get rid of the little girl that was playing with my niece, my sister-in-law and her shaman friend brought my niece to the park. There, they burned joss paper by the tree and started walking home. While they were walking home, my niece asked, "Why isn't my friend coming?" And my sister-in-law didn't answer. She just said that they were all going home. Ever since then, my niece hasn't said anything weird, and I eventually stopped waking up at 3 a.m. every night. This story isn't that scary, but it's true. Over a decade ago, a neighbor, which were a family of 3, lived a few houses down from my parents. The father had started working late and eventually stopped coming home. The son, who usually came over every day to play with my younger siblings, stopped because of his mother. I knew of this because the son and I had spoken a few times about his family. We were used to seeing him and his mom outside of their gated front yard, playing, gardening, and waiting for the father to come home. Strangely, for a few months, no one saw them. We had figured the family left for a vacation since the dad's car was gone too. But the dad had left the family to be with his new lover and only came back after 3 months to pick up the rest of his belongings. When he came home, he found his wife and son dead. The mom had beaten the son to death and hung herself in front of the door. Random nights when I would come home from my late night out, or when I would walk my mom out to our car at around 3 to 5 a.m. for work. I would look over to their house and see the boy standing there, waiting. Other nights, I'd see both of them. Even to this day, I still look over. This event took place in Brown Deer by Milwaukee. A friend of mine told me that a Hmong elder had a house up for rent. It was a very beautiful home with 4 bedrooms and a deep backyard. Despite the fact that I would be the only one living there, I was so happy thinking that I found a really cheap house for rent. I'm getting a good deal for $500 a month, so I signed the lease and moved in a couple of days later. As I was getting settled in my new home, I noticed these papers hanging on the doors and windows. You know, those joss papers? I quickly took them off because I didn't believe in that. Sleeping there the first night, I was sitting on the couch watching TV, and at the corner of my eye, I noticed something crawling down the stairs. I didn't care too much about it, but the next thing I knew, it was sitting next to me, watching TV. I was scared, but acted like I didn't care much, and after a while, it disappeared. I then had a dream that this lady tried to drag me out the window. I fought as hard as I could to not fall out. During nighttime, you could hear someone playing with balls upstairs, bouncing on floors and walls, and lights would flicker. A few nights went on, and I invited a couple of friends to come sleep over and have a few beers. I told my friends what happened the first night I slept here at the home. They didn't believe me, so I told one of my buddies to spend the night upstairs in one of the bedrooms, and he agreed too. Everyone left, and that buddy got wasted, so he went to sleep. I was sleeping downstairs. A few hours later, I saw him being dragged by the lady with long black hair from the top of the stairs all the way down. And right when he reached the bottom, he ran so quick out the door and left home. Ever since then, he never wanted to visit me ever again. I had a relative from Thailand come to visit me, and he asked me why I was still living here. He said that this house is not safe, and the papers that I took down at the beginning, they were there for a reason. If I lived here any longer, I would probably die because this woman's spirit is angry. I asked the landlord about it being haunted, and he said to me that it was, and that's why the previous people here moved out. I'm trying to rent it out until I sell it. I lived there for 3 months until I finally moved out. I only came home to sleep when I was drunk. This is a true event that happened to me in 2009 when I and my recent boyfriend were still dating. Names have been changed. My younger sister Sally was dating this guy in the town of Merced, California. Her boyfriend Joe and my boyfriend Mike are friends. That's how I met my boyfriend Mike. Mike and Sally and I all live in Sacramento. One day, my sister wanted to go visit Joe in Merced, so Mike and I took her. We left at around 7 p.m. and got there at 8 p.m. Our plan was to visit and hang out and drive back home for the night. Eventually, they all got drunk and I did not want to drive home while everyone was knocked out, so we decided to sleep in Joe's room for the night, which is a garage that was turned into a big bedroom. Before explaining what happened, I have to describe the layout of Joe's house so you can get a visual of just exactly what happened. His room used to be a garage, so it was right next to the kitchen, and to get inside the kitchen, you would have to open his bedroom door that leads to a little square hallway. There are 2 doors in this hallway, a door that opens to the backyard and another door that opens up into the kitchen. The kitchen is in the shape of a square. To get to the living room, you would have to cross the kitchen coming from the door of the kitchen. Then, coming out of the kitchen and into the living room, you would have to make a right turn that would lead you into the long hallway past the living room. To the first right of the hallway is the bathroom, and further down to the right is the parents' room. To the left is the other 2 bedrooms that his siblings share. Anyways, this is how the story went. Everyone was drunk and fast asleep after a night of laughing and fun. In the middle of the night, I had to use the bathroom. It felt like I was going to explode if I didn't go, so half asleep and the need to be released on my mind, I opened the bedroom door and then opened the kitchen door and walked past the kitchen, the living room, and into the hallway, and then into the bathroom. By the time I was inside the bathroom and did my business with the bright lights in my eyes and am now fully awake, I realized I rushed to get to the bathroom and did not turn on any lights. Not a single light. It was a long walk back to his bedroom in the dark. For one moment, I panicked but brushed it off right away. Thinking that I'd do this 1,000 times during the daytime anyways, I took a deep breath and walked back as fast as I could through the hallway past the living room. As I made that left turn into the kitchen, I passed the fridge, and at the corner of my eyes, I saw someone standing there next to the stove. They were burning a candle on the stove, so I turned to look to my side, and there was an old Hmong lady standing there in the dark. Her black hair fell to her shoulders, and it was wavy. She was wearing a black t-shirt with a Thailand long wrap dress, the ones old ladies wear in Thailand. She looked straight at me. Her eyes were emotionless and cold and a piercing black. I jumped and said to her, "Holy crap, you scared me." Those were my exact words. She did not say anything to me, assuming it was Joe's mom checking up on the family because the lady looked like her. I went back to the room and fell asleep. The next day, I had forgotten all about my encounter. I was in Joe's room with Sally and Joe's siblings. The siblings' ages range from 8 to 17 years old. All of a sudden, the old lady's face pops up into my head, so I asked the kids, "Hey, does your mom wake up at night to check up on you guys without turning on the lights?" The kids answered, "No, my mother always turns on the light when she walks around at night. She doesn't walk in the dark." "Does she leave her wavy hair down when she goes to sleep?" "No, she keeps it in a bun." I was getting spooked and scared at this time, so I asked, "Does your mother wear a black shirt and one of those Thailand dresses to sleep?" The kids reply, "No, our mother doesn't like to wear those. She doesn't even own one." By this time, I had chills and was scared. I had just seen a ghost and thought it was their mother all along. Then, Joe's oldest sister said, "You saw our grandmother." And all the kids started saying the same thing. "Yes, it's her for sure. She has hair to her shoulder and is wavy, and she likes to wear those Thailand dresses all the time." Then, what they said sent chills up and down my spine for days, and it still does. "Our grandmother passed away last year." About 3 years ago, my aunt suddenly passed away. So me, my wife, and our 3-year-old son went over to my cousin's house to help out with hosting family, friends, and guests at their house, not to mention the cooking. Before we went over to my cousin's house, we never mentioned to my son that his nitai passed away or what purpose was going on over there. My son is the only child, so he's very independent and learns to play on his own. The first day, we were at my deceased aunt's house at around noon. My son comes and tells his mom that while she was washing the dishes, he wants to show her something in one of the bedrooms. He wanted to show her a ghost. I'm standing there listening to what my son is saying to my wife, and my wife tells him to come tell me about it. She's freaked out, but she was acting calm. My son runs over to me and says he wants me to go with him to the bedroom so he can show me a ghost. I was freaked out but remained calm, and I told him I wasn't going to the room with him. My son has always told us about spirits as soon as he was able to speak, so my wife and I knew that he could see them, but we were never too sure until this event. After I told my son I wasn't going with him to the room, we went outside to the backyard. There were several relatives standing around saying that there's no such thing as ghosts, and they laughed while my son was talking to me. A couple minutes later, my son comes back to the house, and he's got a big stick with him that he found. His grandmother, my mom, asked him why he was taking that big stick with him into the house. My son said, "I'm just going to hit the ghost." His grandmother yelled at him to throw the stick away, and he did. even though he wasn't too happy about it. Later that night, during the drive home, I brought up the subject and asked my son what he saw in one of the rooms earlier that day. And that's when my son said that he saw my aunt, the one that passed away. Ever since I was 8 years old, I've had this feeling of having encounters with the dead. When we lived in our old house, I used to have an imaginary friend that my parents said I always spoke to. Although I cannot remember her name, I do remember one instance. I had been sitting in my parents' room watching a movie, and I offered my imaginary friend to sit on the beanbag chair that I had brought into the room. I've always been told that I was a very OCD tidy child, and I remembered making sure that the beanbag chair was completely flat and smooth, as everything had to be back then. I remembered turning towards the movie after I had offered for her to sit down and hearing a sound. Looking at the beanbag chair, there was an indent as though someone was sitting down. My parents stated that I often spoke to people who weren't there and thought it to just be my imagination. We moved into our new house when I was 10, and although I feel safe in the home, I've always had this feeling of being watched. My friends often commented on how I speak to people who are not there. They too feel it is just my imagination. My mother has started finally to believe my stories because 2 years ago, my grandmother got very sick. She and I have always been close, and I spent many long summers with my grandmother, so when she got sick, it was very hard on me. She had been a strong smoker all of her life, and she always had this certain smell to her, different than a cigarette smoke. Anyways, my grandmother ended up not making it, and she passed away 2 days before my 17th birthday. I didn't even get a chance to say I love you one last time or to hear her voice say it back. My parents gave me a gold angel necklace the day of her wake, which was on my birthday. My grandfather didn't want her actual funeral to be on my birthday. My mother said that my grandmother was now an angel because she loved me more than anything, and that the necklace would always symbolize her love for me. I wore that necklace every day. Exactly 1 year after her death, I was speeding in my car, and I know I was stupid, and this was to meet my at the time boyfriend for our date, which I was late for. I was driving down a road that I've been on many times before, and I knew all the turns to slow down on. At one point, I had not been paying attention and I lost control of my car. I went into a ditch which was surrounded by trees. I was so far down that no one could see me. When I had lost control, I started to scream as my car started to spin around, and I just remembered stopping and feeling this warmth as though someone was holding me. When I had finally stopped, I was clinging to the angel necklace that I had gotten on the day of her wake. I do not remember ever reaching up to grab the necklace. When everything became silent, I heard a whisper of, "I love you," and I swear I could smell her distinct smell, one that I will never be able to forget. I looked around my car and started to cry. I couldn't get out of any of the doors because my car was smashed in at every point except for where I was sitting. The glass from both my front and back windshields were in a circle around me, as though I was in a bubble. My rearview mirror, which had broken off at impact, had hit my shoulder, and that was the only thing that hurt me, just a tiny little bruise. When the police came, they thought I was going to have to be airlifted out. They said it was a miracle that I was even walking. They said I should have been at least paralyzed from the waist down. When they saw the mirror, they had asked where it had hit me, fully believing that it had hit me in the head when I told them that it was just my shoulder. They didn't believe me. They said that it was as if something had deflected it from hitting my head, and it went at an angle impossible of going down on its own. I had climbed out of my window and taken a look at my car. It didn't even resemble a car. I've told my story to those who have asked, and I will always state with all my heart that my grandmother was the one that saved my life that day, and that she was the reason that I'm able to walk and breathe on my own. I just wanted to say, thank you, Grandma, for saving my life and for always being there for me. It was summer of 2010 when I moved to my first apartment. I was 26 years old and confident in my ongoing life. I'm a front desk supervisor for one of the biggest hotels in Minneapolis. So yes, I was alone, but not lonely at the time. Before moving in, I had a Yorkshire Terrier dog named Lex. He was my best friend since I was 18, and yes, he was living with me. I was working second shift, so during the night when I came home from work, I would take him to the potty outside. Then I would play with him inside the apartment until we were both hungry and sleepy. Lex is very smart. Whenever he needs to go potty, he'll either bark or lick my hands or face if I'm sleeping. 2 weeks after the new location, I started to notice something strange about my routine. It seemed a lot slower than normal. I thought maybe it's just Lex. Then I realized that Lex is acting weird. He's usually so energetic when I came home, but for some reason, he looked so weak and exhausted. I thought he was sick, so I took him to see a veterinarian the next morning before work. It was 8 a.m. when I got to the vet. They did some kind of physical exam on my dog, and for some reason, they wanted Lex to stay due to high blood pressure. So I left him there for one more day. As I came back from work, knowing Lex wouldn't be home, I decided to get on Facebook and chat with old friends. I went to the living room to use the computer and had only the kitchen light on. After 1 hour of chatting, I saw on my screen a reflection of a big shadow that went across the kitchen. I looked over but didn't see anything, so I thought it was just my imagination or because I was on the computer for too long. The next morning, I went to go pick up Lex. The veterinarian said that he needs to rest and he should be fine. I was happy and relieved. Again, I came home from work, took Lex to go to the potty, then continued with my night. Later that night, I woke up at 2 a.m. because Lex needed to go to the potty again. As I opened the door, Lex just laid on his little dog bed while staring at me. He didn't want to move, so I was kind of like, "Come on, Lex. All right then, don't wake me up for no reason." And then I went off to sleep again. An hour later, I woke up again. I turned on the lights and asked Lex again. He was laying on his bed still, but he just stared at me. But this time he had tears coming out of his left eye. So I was like, "Oh, you just must miss me, huh? You'll feel better soon, okay?" Then I was off to sleep. This time, I had a dream of Lex. He was talking to me in Hmong. He said, "Those 2 times you woke up, I didn't lick you. It was the boy. Why didn't you save me?" I woke up petrified. I felt a cold breeze through my spines and my heart started pounding suddenly. I turned on most of my lights and looked at Lex. He was dead. I called my parents. They had my cousin's grandpa, a shaman, to come over. It was 9 a.m. when he got to my place and I didn't sleep at all when it happened. After he took a look at the situation, he told my parents and I that the boy who died here took your dog's spirit. The boy was riding a dog and was using his hands to cover your dog's mouth. He licked your hands to see if you love your dog more than him, but your 2 chances were over. The boy said that he wouldn't bother you anymore now that he has a friend." After hearing that, I felt cold, scattered goosebumps all over my body. 3 days later, I changed apartment rooms and moved somewhere else after my lease was over. I felt so bad that I couldn't save Lex's life. I never want to go through that again. Here's a story I found on my app. About 17 years ago, my younger sister Mary and her friends decided to play with a homemade Ouija board. It was mid-October and Halloween was fast approaching. I thought they were being silly and decided to ask the spirits of the board a question. "What am I thinking?" Well, the scariest thing happened. It spelled out, "Et tu brute," which was exactly what I was thinking. I was a skeptic about the supernatural until that day. However, that was only the beginning. My sister continued to play more with the Ouija board and demonic happenings began to occur. She was only 14 and didn't realize the implications of her curiosity. Mary began to experience extreme insomnia and visions or hallucinations of a man with vampire teeth and red eyes. She would sleep for a short while, and then I would awake to blood-curdling screams. Mary would yell for me and beg me to sleep in her room with her. After a few months, Mary started to see apparitions in the windows at night. She begged me to switch rooms with her. To better understand the rest of the story, I will describe our house. Mary's room was originally a family room with a very large floor-to-ceiling window in the center looking out to the front lawn. It had 4 windows looking out towards the back of the house. The room had its own sink and a door to the outside. My mom had been renting the house for less than a year. Across from our house, there is an old graveyard with about 20 graves. After a month had passed, my sister began to see dark, shadowy figures wandering the house. Of course, I didn't see them. Unfortunately, I began to hear footsteps on the flat roof of my bedroom. Stomp, stomp, stomp. I climbed to the roof to see who was up there, but there was nothing. I also kept the heavy drapes shut because I was afraid of seeing something scary. One night, 2 of my friends came over and we were just joking around when I looked out the window to see 2 red glowing eyes staring at me. I screamed and told my friend Lisa to shut the curtains. I told them what I saw and they decided to go home and refused to come back. A few days later, when I was taking a shower, something opened the bathroom door. I quickly wrapped a towel around myself and ran into the small hallway, but no one was there. My bedroom, which used to be my sister's, was right next to the bathroom. I looked at the door handle and watched it turn by itself. Out of nowhere, there was a loud knock and boom against my bedroom door. I ran into the bathroom and locked myself in until my mom and sister came home from the store. My sister was so freaked out that she grabbed the Ouija board and some matches. We both ran out to the front lawn and tried to burn it, but it wouldn't burn. Mary began to cry and told my mom the experiences she was having. My mom, being a Catholic, became extremely upset. She took my sister to counseling, which later led to a juvenile detention center. After several months, Mary moved to Ohio with my dad. I then began to see shadow forms throughout the house. I could not sleep and I continued to see ghostly apparitions of old people staring into my bedroom window. One night, while I was taking out the garbage, I heard a low growl from the tall grass in my backyard. The lawnmower didn't work and the grass grew to about 5 feet, kind of like field grass. Dumb me decided I would go towards the sound. I could feel the dry grass rubbing against my arms as I pushed forward. I think I got about 10 feet before I heard the most horrific guttural roar. It sounded like a cross between a bear and a wolf. To this day, I have heard nothing like it. Something was moving quickly and heavily through the grass towards me. As I turned to run back towards the house, I saw a dark form lift itself up from the ground onto 2 legs. All I could really remember is that the 2 slanted red eyes bore a strong hole into my mind. I screamed and did not turn back as I slammed the laundry door behind me. I had trouble catching my breath and could feel sweat streaming down my temples. I later found out from some kids whose relatives owned the house that it was built over the graveyard. They didn't even bother to dig up the graves. I guess enough water filled the crawl space underneath to loosen up some of the graves, so they just filled it with cement and dirt. My mom realized how terrified I was of the house, so she decided to rent out an apartment. My sister continued to experience paranormal and demonic events when she was living with my dad, until she moved out. Those stories I will save for another day. Back in Thailand, there were 2 friends named Thai and Vang. They were both in their late teens, 17 to 18. Being in their prime of dating, they decided to go meet and chat with other girls from another village. However, the village would take 8 hours to walk there. On one mid-afternoon, they ventured off to get to this town before darkness fell upon them. By the time they reached the village, it was already 9 or so, and the families were heading off to bed or were already in bed. The night quickly turned humid but windy. The wind howled and made the leaves rustle and branches break from the jungle. The girl that Vang chose to talk to had already fallen asleep, and for the life of him, he could not wake her up for a conversation. So Tai talked to one girl a few houses down while Vang kept a lookout. After a few hours of talking, the girl was tired and had to go sleep due to early morning chores. Both men started back to their own village. It was still early in the morning, but pitch dark outside. They walked close to each other to not lose way of the trail. 2 hours into the walk, Tai became exhausted and just couldn't bear to keep his eyes open anymore, but kept going because Vang wanted to get home. 10 minutes later, Tai had an awkward feeling, as if they were being followed. Vang could hear slight footsteps shuffling behind them.
"Do you hear that?"
says Vang. Both being a bit paranoid, agreed that it may have been just other men walking back to the village as well, since there were a lot of other young men in the village who would walk at that time to see girls. An hour went by, and Tai and Vang agreed to stop and sleep a bit on the edge of the trail. Besides the trail, there was nothing but tall grass and some trees here and there. Suddenly, the air turned cold as if they were in the mountains. With the light of the moon, they could see their breaths as they spoke to each other. Vang flattened the grass while Tai was able to find some leaves. He laid them on the ground and plopped on top of them from being so tired. Vang, turning back from using the bathroom, joined the leaves next to Tai. By this time, the air was freezing and the friends slept closer to each other for body heat.
"Vang, why are your arms so hairy? I was just going to ask you too."
Then, out of nowhere, they hear an old grumbling voice.
"Is it cold for you too?"
Vang and Tai jumped to their feet and ran as fast as they could all the way back to the village. In the distance, they could hear a voice shout after them.
"Guys, wait for me."
This happened in 2009 when my mother was very ill and she was at a hospital in Madison, Wisconsin. It was my turn to go stay overnight with her. I stayed by her bedside until she fell asleep and I got bored, so this was probably around 10 to 11 p.m. Stupid of me, I decided to take the elevator down to the main lobby and use the computers. As I was minding my own business, trying not to freak out about creepy feelings you get while at the hospital, my niece called me and I was talking to her for about 5 minutes or so. Then, our conversation started to get cut off, and what sounded like my mother's voice came on a line and said my Hmong name in a scary tone. No one calls me by my real name besides the old folks. Then, the line came back on to my niece. I started looking around to see if anyone was there, but obviously, who would be around during those hours? I asked her if she also heard it, and she said no. So I told her what happened during that 15-second delay, and she said, "Oh, maybe your mom needs you." Then I told her that I'll call her in the morning. I quickly walked back to the elevators, and my mind started wandering off to the movie The Eye. There was a scene in the movie where the lady was going on the elevator and the old man was behind her. My heart was pounding hard, thinking, why is this such a long ride up? As soon as I got into her room, I checked on her and she was still sleeping, so I went to sleep next to her. I never told my mother what happened that night. One day, when my mom was home alone with my baby sister, my sister was sleeping upstairs in her crib, and my mom was downstairs washing the dishes. The mom had a baby monitor on top of the microwave. When she was about done with the dishes, she heard someone whispering in her bedroom. Whoever it was in the room with my baby sister was making those baby noises to make my sister laugh. My mom started to hear my sister laugh in the background, and so she wanted to know what was going on. She went upstairs and stopped at the door to listen if my sister was awake. She didn't hear anything. So when she opened the door, no one was there and found that my sister was still fast asleep. So then we decided to throw out the baby monitors and always had the baby sleep on the couch where we can keep a close eye on them. My 14-year-old cousin plays the king for the funeral and always stays late past midnight until he is done playing his part, and then he comes home. He doesn't know how to drive, so my aunt and uncle would always pick him up whenever he calls them. On this one particular night, my younger cousin was at the funeral, and my aunt and uncle got a call from him saying that he's done and to come pick him up. He doesn't have a phone yet, so he usually has to borrow it from someone else to call them. When they got there, my aunt and uncle decided to stay for a bit at the funeral and wait to find my younger cousin, and then they'll all go together to the car. They stayed there for a good 10 minutes by the cooking and food area and didn't see my little cousin throughout all that time. Then, right when they decided to get up and were about to go look for him to go home, there he was, coming right at them, saying, "Let's go home." As they got outside to the car, my little cousin got inside and shut the door. The ride home was more quiet because when they asked him about how the funeral was, they got no response, so they thought my little cousin was too tired and just fell asleep all the way in the back seat or something. When they arrived, they told him to wake up and that they got home. They heard movement like someone was getting up from the back seat, and when they opened the door for him, he didn't come out. My uncle peeked inside and he was nowhere to be found in the back seat. So my aunt thought he was mad, so he hid in the trunk area, and my aunt opened the back and he wasn't there either. They looked everywhere around the car and looked by the house to see if he had already walked to the door. By then, my aunt and uncle got freaked out and thought he was mad for waiting too long, so he probably ran somewhere to go hide. They had no idea where he could have gone because they looked everywhere already and still could not find him. After a good 20 minutes of looking, they had finally decided that they were going to call the cops. Right before they could even call the cops, they got a phone call from my little cousin saying that he's ready for them to go pick him up. When they got that call, their hearts dropped. They both were shocked and said it felt like deja vu. By that time, my aunt and uncle's heart were already a little scared. They wondered who was the one that got in the car with them and called them. When they got back to the funeral, my little cousin was already waiting outside for them. He got in and complained about how tired he was and kept on talking and talking. My aunt and uncle proceeded to ask if he had called them a while ago, and he replied that he had just gotten done and called them now. My toddler was doing things that we didn't teach him. He was born at the end of 2018, so his toddler years were spent with just us and the television. Quarantine was tough for all of us, but my wife and I noticed strange behaviors from our son during that time. He used to stand, bend over, and look between his legs constantly. At first, we didn't think anything of it, but one night, while our son was fast asleep, my wife and I were talking and joking around when she brought up that when she was a kid, her and her friends used to say that looking between your legs is how you see ghosts. You could definitely feel the atmosphere change as our conversation went from lively and humorous to serious. Our son's room was right next to ours. We heard him speaking gibberish and went to go check on him. We always kept the door slightly open so that we could hear him in case anything was ever to happen. When we looked over, the door was wide open. I was the one who put him into bed that night and knew I didn't leave it open. Our son was still a baby talking from his bed. My wife grabbed my arm and turned on the bedroom light. My son was standing on his bed, bent over and looking over at us through his legs. I really tried to keep my cool until I heard the bathroom door shut from down the hall. My wife ran to pick up my son. I walked over to investigate the bathroom and found no one. We checked all the rooms, doors, and windows before we went back to bed. We stopped our son whenever he tried to get back into that stance. After a week or so, he stopped doing it altogether. It was a relief because, honestly, we were both scared. Another incident happened around Halloween. We were all asleep already when my wife was woken up by our son yelling and crying. She, of course, woke me up to go check. When I got into his room, he was sitting at the corner of his bed and the wall. He quieted down when he saw me. I plopped down on his bed next to him in a joking manner, and he laughed. What he did next sent chills down my spine. My son had leaves in his hand. I had no idea when or where he had gotten them, but he put them to his face and said,
"Me Mom."
At first, I thought he was just imitating a monster face or something he saw on TV or YouTube, but then he singled out one of the leaves, put it to his eye, and looked through it.
"Me Mom. Me Mom."
He yelled frantically. I turned to the door and saw nothing. That's when I remembered a story my grandmother told me about seeing ghosts through leaves. It was something about caterpillars eating leaves, and if you looked through the holes left behind in the leaves, you could see spirits. I grabbed the leaf from my son. There's no way he was doing what I thought he was doing. My wife came over and asked me what he was yelling about. I told her he was having a nightmare, so she said we could let him sleep with us. She picked him up and walked out. I was following when, stupidly, I felt like looking through the leaf. I regretted it so much because when I did, I saw two little girls in front of me. One turned her head, noticed me, and they both ran down the hall. This story happened many years ago when my husband and I were going through a rough patch. At that time, my husband worked graveyard shift, so he was hardly ever around. Because of our constant arguing and bickering, our home soon felt dark and lonely. During that time, our daughter was only 4 years old. On this one particular night that my husband was off of work, we argued again. I packed my belongings, took our daughter, and headed to my parents' house. They lived at least 20 minutes away. After hours of getting lectured, my parents made me go back home. They had told me that they didn't want a divorced daughter and would not take me back if I divorced my husband, so I had no choice but to head back home. At this time, it was already around 9 p.m. I cried along the way as I was driving. I didn't want to go back into that broken home yet, so I just kept driving and driving. We made it to a spot at a nearby park. I parked there and just cried. I told my daughter nothing was wrong when she asked me why I was crying. Suddenly, my daughter goes, "Mommy, there's a grandma outside the door. I think she wants to come in." I immediately stopped crying and looked around. My heart dropped. There was no one. I felt the hairs on my body stand up and raced back home. I called my husband and asked him to wait by the door for me. He asked what was going on. I told him to just wait and I'll tell him later. Once we got home, I grabbed my daughter and ran back inside the house as my husband was waiting by the door. I didn't tell him anything until the next day. I explained to him what happened and he yelled at me why I did something so stupid. He also told me that when he looked out the window and saw my car pulling up, he thought I had brought my mom over to talk to us. When he opened the door and waited, no one was there, so he thought he saw wrong. We moved out a few months after that and did a ritual. Today and yesterday was not only the scariest thing my girlfriend and I witnessed, but the worst. We decided to go out on a vacation in the woods where we will be renting out a cabin for the weekend. Several friends came along to make things more amusing. Just after arriving to our cabin, I had a strange, eerie feeling that we weren't the only ones. I could possibly be over-exaggerating, but something tells me otherwise. It was a long trip and we were both exhausted. We finished unpacking and decided to settle down and cook. After dinner, we had thought that it was time for bed. And that's when it came to me. We weren't alone. At approximately 2:47 a.m., I woke up to a strange sound. It was the sound of a child crying downstairs. Terrified, I ran into the room, woke up the friends closest to the restroom to ask if they could hear what just happened. To have no concern to them, they fell back asleep. Having the courage to go into my room, I heard multiple footsteps from all over the cabin. Quickly, I woke up my girlfriend to stay up and ask if she could hear what was going on. When I woke her up, things were quieting down, so we decided to turn on the TV and watch a few shows until sunrise. The sun came up and I waited until I heard doors open from the others before I opened mine. We all headed downstairs for breakfast. Having the incident happen to me, I explained what happened. They all laughed and thought I was joking. Afterwards, we all decided to go sledding. When we came back, I had the same feeling, as if I didn't want to be there. Soon, after entering the cabin, I felt my hair rise up. Once I felt that, I jokingly asked if they wanted to leave. Of course, they all wanted to stay. It was a vacation. Lunch came to dinner and nightfall came. Again, that night, the same incident occurred, but this time my girlfriend was staying up with me. We both heard the noises, a cry, footsteps coming from downstairs, and footsteps upstairs where our room is located. Seconds became minutes when, soon enough, the doorknob decided to turn. To my knowledge, it looked like someone wanted to come in. Quickly running to lock the door quietly opened. I slammed the door and locked it. I looked under and saw a pale face looking right back. Frightened, I turned back to my girlfriend and realized that she was under the blanket, scared to death. I cried for help, but no one could hear us. We got under the blanket and it seemed like something was in the room with us. The bed pushed down from our feet. We kicked and there was nothing. Suddenly, blankets started to get lifted from our feet. We saw what seemed to be the figure of a pale woman. We jumped out of bed and ran into our friend's room and woke up our friends to explain. My girlfriend started sobbing and went into a seizure attack. We called 911 and ended up at a hospital and out of the cabin. In the morning, we thought it was time to get the luggage at the cabin and come back to the hospital. Nothing happened when we entered the cabin, but of course I had the same feeling. We got back to the hospital and entered the room, but my girlfriend was acting strange. She laughed at the incident that happened to the both of us. Later that day, she was released and prescribed with some medication. When we were heading home, I explained what happened to my friends, and they apologized for mistaking that I was lying. Once we were home, my girlfriend and I decided to head to bed. I stayed awake while I was watching my girlfriend sleep. A few minutes passed, and I hear mumbling from her. She woke up to look at me. She told me that she's seeing what happened to us in her dream. She even said that the thing grabbed her, pulled her away from me while her eyes were opened. She told me that she couldn't move or talk while I was there. I didn't even notice anything. Was it sleep paralysis? Did it take her spiritually? I don't know what to do. This is a story my uncle told me when I was young. It happened to a relative that once lived in my uncle's village. Long ago, in Laos before the war, there was a guy named Yi. He liked to go hunting. Yi had a wife and 2 sons. The older one was named Meng. He was about 15, and the younger one was just still a young child. One day, Yi wanted to go hunting for a couple of days, but no one was willing to go with him because most of the other men had to go farming. Therefore, he took his oldest son with him. The next morning came, and Yi was preparing rice for him and his son on their journey. His wife told him to watch over their son and told the son to do everything that his dad said. Then Yi and his son left for their journey. They had gotten to the forest and set up camp. They ate a little and went off to hunt. Yi had a Hmong rifle and Meng had a crossbow. They scouted the forest for hours and spotted nothing. Yi decided that they should get together on the high ground to see if they can spot any animals passing by. They got to a big rock sitting on top of higher grounds and decided to wait there. Meng told his father that he was thirsty and that he was going to fetch some water from a river up ahead. From where Yi is standing, on top of the rock, he can see a whole field of trees, bushes, and tall grass. A small stream is to the right, and that is where Meng went. But to get to this stream, Meng had to cross through into the bushes and the tall grass. So from where Yi was standing, he couldn't see the stream or where his son had left to get the water, but he could still hear the sound of running water. He waited for a couple of minutes and he saw someone coming out from the forest. It was a small girl coming and going into the direction that his son went towards. He thought his eyes were playing tricks on him because he was a little tired too. So he got up and yelled out for his son. Meng, Meng, are you done yet? Hurry up and come back here. His son came back from the stream and didn't look scared. It didn't seem like anything was wrong. So Yi thought that maybe Meng didn't see anything. Therefore, he didn't tell his son what he saw, nor ask if he saw anything too, to not scare his son. He told Meng to get back behind them, and his son did what he said. Yi scouted, and then something was coming out from the trees. It was a small deer with no antlers walking by. The father got excited and aimed for the little deer. Bam! He shot the deer and it fell to the ground. Right as Yi was about to raise his head up from his rifle and look at the deer, Meng ran fast from his side down to the deer. As Yi looked at Meng running down, he then noticed and was frightened. It wasn't Meng running downhill. It was the little girl he saw earlier passing through the forest. It ran to the deer, and as Yi looked down to the deer, it was Meng. At this point, the father was really scared. The little girl came on top of Meng and sat on his chest. The father acted fast and pulled out his Hmong knife that he had tied onto his waist. He spit on the knife and chanted a few magic words and came downhill to where Meng and the girl was. He yelled at her, telling her that if she didn't want to die, she better give him back his son. If not, then he's going to cut her in half. The little girl made some strange weird sound and got off Meng and ran into the forest. Yi picked up the son and started shaking him. Luckily, his son was still breathing. He then carried his child out of the forest. He carried and carried Meng until they were almost home and got too tired. He noticed that not too far ahead there was a farm and there was a family still working. He laid his son down and then ran to the family shouting for help. The family came and the father of the family helped Yi carry Meng all the way back to the village. Back at the village, they took care of Meng's wounds. Yi told his family about what happened. Meng slept all day and did not wake up until the next afternoon. He was not strong, but they asked him if he remembered anything. Meng told them that it seemed like he just had a dream. He said that when he went to the stream to get water, he didn't see anything, but he did hear footsteps from behind him. He didn't care because he thought they could have been small animals. Then he heard his dad call for him and turned back to go to his dad. As soon as he ran back, he felt a little foot trip him. He fell all the way down flat on the ground and was not able to get back up on his feet. He then used all of his might, but he still could not get up, and so he crawled. He crawled out of the bushes to see his dad up at the rock. Right when he was about to say something, he saw his dad already raising his rifle, and then shot him. That's when he blacked out. Meng then goes on that when he was blacked out, a lady came into his dreams and told him that that's what he gets for not sharing their food. Earlier, when Yi and Meng came to the forest, she saw that they had rice and was hoping to get some. She followed them into the forest hoping she could get a share when they eat. When the father and son got to their camp and ate a small snack before hunting, the father did not bother to do a ritual offering to the spirits of the lands. This is a custom that Hmong are supposed to do before hunting. Because the father didn't do it, this angered the spirit and she wanted to take Meng. That's why this whole situation with the deer happened. They performed a blessing for the both of them and then sent a large food offering back to the place that they set up camp. After that, they were both fine and well again.